Toward the end of my examination, the hospital commander, the base commander, and a guy in civilian clothes, those three people walked into the exam room and asked the doctor to excuse himself. And the hospital commander addressed me very formally and said, Sergeant Lovelace should have nothing to do with Sergeant Tobias, and that means no contact. You can't speak with him, you can't call him on the phone, you can't pass a message to him through a third party. This is an order, Sergeant Lovelace, and if you disobey this order, there will be consequences. And that's when he said, do you understand? And of course I understand consequences. This was just, the Air Force did not want us to get together. I was hospitalized 3 days, I believe it was 4. I knew that I'd be going home the next day and that I'd have 30 days medical leave, which is unheard of. I felt unwell. So on the evening of my last night there, around 8 o'clock, the night nurse, who I knew well, came in with an injection for me to help me sleep and help with the pain of this sunburn or whatever it was. As she came in the room, 2 guys in blue business suits followed her in. There was a shorter guy, 40s, mid-40s, and there was a younger guy, late 20s or very early 30s. They carried themselves like they were policemen. They had that swagger about them. I could see that they had shoulder holsters. The older guy carried a briefcase. The nurse is going to give me my injection, and the older guy speaks up and says, if that's going to sedate Sergeant Lovelace, it's going to have to wait. We need to ask him just a few questions and shut the door on your way out. So she kind of leaves in a huff. They shut the door, and they each pull up a chair on either side of my bed. The bed wasn't electric, it was a crank type affair. This younger guy cranked my bed up so that I was sitting in kind of a semi-upright position. They showed me their credentials. The older guy was a major. The younger guy was a captain, security police badge, and said, it looks like you boys trespassed onto some federal property. Looked like you'd set up a camp and were planning on returning. And I said, no, sir, we were in some nature preserve, I thought. We woke up sick as dogs and just came home. We didn't bother to take our stuff. We weren't concerned about it. And he says, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, son. This is the guy that had this thick Alabama accent, thick Southern accent of some kind. And then he said, is this about growing a patch of marijuana in the woods down there? I didn't take that lightly. In 1977, a potential general discharge at best could have gone to penitentiary. And I said, no, sir, absolutely not. I don't do drugs. I certainly don't grow drugs either. And he said, well, then, son, you wouldn't mind if we took a look in your car, would you? Just to make sure you don't have a big old bag of marijuana in the trunk. So I said, sure. And he said, and you wouldn't mind if we just took a quick peek around your house, would you? Would you mind that? Just to make sure you don't have that big old bag of marijuana and we can maybe close this case and be done with it. And I said, no, sir, I guess not. And he laid out some forms on my tray table and asked me to sign them and handed me a pen. I had trouble seeing because I was still photophobic. And I said, sir, what are these? And he said, son, these are waiver and consent forms, waivers of certain rights, and I just need your signature. You haven't done anything you're not supposed to do, have you? I thought if I questioned this, it would make me look guilty. I signed 4 forms.
You're thinking that this is about drugs and not about your encounter at that moment.
Yes. As he goes to leave, he gets down next to my ear and talks in a whisper, and he says, son, I know, and you know, you two knuckleheads stumbled onto something when you were down there, and I think you know what I mean. And I didn't answer him. He says, son, all I need to know is how many pictures you took of it. And without thinking, I blurted out, sir, I didn't take a single picture of it. He just smiled. And it occurred to me in that moment, I don't know how this guy knows, but this guy knows. He knows what we saw. After we went to the hospital, I told my wife, I said, I want to stop by and see Toby one last time. They had cut orders for him to go to Japan, and they cut those orders at light speed. I wanted to tell him goodbye, and I felt like it might give me some closure. My wife, she wasn't happy with that idea. She says, Terry, these OSI people said we're to have no contact. She acquiesced and pulled over, and I hopped out of the car and I ran up to his door. I knocked 3 times real loud and then just opened the door and yelled, hey, it's me. His wife, walking past the foyer where I came in, she gave me a hard look and said, you're not supposed to be here. Toby, who was in a bedroom down the hallway and to the left, came out of the bedroom. When I saw him, I felt shocked. He looked like hell. Blue jeans, barefoot, his hair was all wonky, and he had a growth of beard, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. This is a guy that was meticulous about his appearance. He walked up to me, and I think he was having trouble figuring out what to say, and we kind of both held out hands to shake hands at the same time. We did kind of meet and do this an elegant kind of handshake. I said, I know you guys are going to Japan. I just wanted to stop by and wish you well. It's been good to work with you. And he looked up at me and said, it happened, didn't it, Terry? And I said, yes, my brother, it really happened. And he said, yeah, but why us? I said, man, I don't have a clue why us. I felt panic. I ran out of the home and ran to the car, slammed the door and told my wife, let's go home. But it wasn't what I expected it to be. Here this guy was my best friend, we worked together, and I wanted nothing to do with the guy. I felt nervous, upset. My friendship with Toby had changed dramatically. I think that maybe he felt likewise. And I don't know if that speaks to the influence these things can have over us or what. So when they sent us home from the hospital, they sent Toby and I both with this big bottle of pills. And I was to take 3 a day for 2 weeks. So that very first evening home from the hospital, about 6:30, there was a knock at our door. My wife went to the door and opened it, and it was a nurse. Because she wasn't wearing an insignia of rank. She wasn't wearing a name tag, but she was dressed in a nurse's outfit. And she came in and introduced herself as Nurse Janet. Wasn't real friendly. What she wanted to do was count my pills. And she came every single night about the same time. So about 4 days into this, I'm not myself. Laying around watching cartoons all day. I'm not balancing a checkbook. I'm not active. I'm not right. And my wife sat down and she said, I don't know if you can see this or not, but something's not right with you. And she said, I think it's because of those pills they have you taking. And she says, what I think you ought to do is stop taking those pills. She says, take a pill with every meal we take and flush it down the toilet. I tried to look them up in the physician's desk reference, color plates of every drug in the U.S. formulary. This capsule was not in that. That means it was put together by a pharmacist. So about the sixth night into this, I had my porch light on. I wanted to see if she had a sticker on her car, because the only way that a civilian could access that base would be they had to have a little blue and white sticker on the front of your car. Security was very tight. So I'm thinking, she doesn't have a sticker on her car. I didn't know what to think about that. She was no one that I knew from the hospital squadron. So I had a friend at the hospital, a nurse. She was an RN. I called her up and I said, I'm taking this dose the way I'm supposed to, and Sheila pointed out to me that she thinks they're making me stupid. And she says, well, I don't know anything about your pills, Terry. She was nervous on the phone, and she said, but I'm going to get off about 6, and I can swing by the house if you'd like. Nurse Janet came, counted my pills for the evening. Of course, she gets the right amount, makes the note in the chart, and she's gone in 5 minutes. And about 20 minutes later, my friend from the hospital gets there. But she was an officer. So she came in, and I offered her a beer, a can of Coors, and she said sure. And she sat down and drank a beer with us and talked about my hospitalization. She wanted to know how I was feeling and the like. And I described Nurse Janet to her and told her she didn't have a sticker on the front of her car and she wore no insignia of rank or name tag. And she says, well, I don't know anybody in the hospital squadron that meets that description. She said, I don't know what these pills are, but I think you're the best judge. You know, if you think they're making you stupid, if I were you, I wouldn't take them. So they had me out of the hospital squadron while Toby was processing out. I was working in a supply squadron. One day, the first sergeant of the supply squadron came down to see me and said, hey, Lovelace, the OSI is sending a car for you. It's probably in the front. He said, if I were you, I wouldn't keep them waiting. So sure enough, here's a dark navy blue security police car that pulls up. A young senior airman gets out and says, Sergeant Lovelace? And I said, yes. And he puts me in back of this police car. My first thought was, roll the window down, it's stuffy in here. Hey, where's the handle to get out of here? Where are the locks at? And then I realized that this is a place where they put people in handcuffs. That made me anxious. So the office of the OSI was inside this big security police building.
The Department of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, OSI, is a U.S. federal law enforcement agency that reports directly to the Secretary of the Air Force.
We walked up to a door. It buzzed. He opened it. We went in and the door shut behind us, so we're kind of squeezed into the smaller space. And then there's a second buzzer goes off and he opens the inside door. So we were inside the building. I didn't see anybody walking around. I didn't see another soul. But this guy, this kid, took me down to the end of the hallway. Using a key, he opened the door and said, have a seat. Someone will be right with you. These were interrogation rooms. There was an A, B, C, D, and I was down on the right-hand side of the hallway. Inside this, it's about as big as my guest bathroom. It's a small space. In the middle of it is a gray military issue desk, along with a chair on rollers that was padded and comfortable, so I took that seat. And in the corners of this interrogation room were these, they were made out of fiberglass, and they came in a variety of colors, and they were kind of like scoop-shaped. And I sat there and I saw a framed mirror to my left. There was an electric clock over the door. And I sat there and I watched the clock. I sat there a good 2 hours. So around 11:15 or so, these two agents, the same ones that saw me in my hospital room, walk into the interrogation room. The door shuts behind them, and they're completely ignoring me. And they're talking about golf, except for the major to say, and motion me to get out of the comfortable chair so he could have it. And I sat in one of the fiberglass chairs. The captain pulled up another fiberglass chair, and they set a little tape recorder up. He pulled out some files and set them in front of me. Then he addresses me, and he says, "Well, Sergeant Lovelace, would you be glad to put this behind you today?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I would be glad to put this behind me today." And he says, "Well, we might just be able to do that. And I'm going to need your cooperation. You understand that?" And I said, "Oh, yes, sir, I'll cooperate." And he said, "And you know that you're going to be subject to hypnosis, and they're going to give you a little drug in your arm." And I said, "Sir, I don't want to be hypnotized, and I don't want any drugs." And he said, "Well, son, you agreed to this." And that's when he went through the manila folder and pulled out a sheet of paper and slammed it on the desk in front of me and pointed to my signature and said, "Is that not your signature, son?" And I said, "Yes, sir, it is, but at the time that I signed it, I really didn't understand." He said, "Well, what didn't you understand?" I said, "I didn't understand that I was going to be hypnotized or given drugs. I didn't know that." And he said, "Well, son, this is no big deal. They just give you a little drug to relax you, and it makes the hypnosis so much easier." He says, "And it'll help you recall things." And my thought then was, what would you want me to recall? That's when my thought was, oh yeah, these guys I think have a clue of what we saw. And I said, "Sir, I understand." And I'm turned to bargaining. I said, "Maybe we can do the hypnosis without the drug." And he says, "Son, if this makes you nervous, I can tear this piece of paper up right now." And I said, "You can, sir?" He says, "Oh yeah, not a problem." He said, "I can tear it up, throw it away in the trash can. Would that make you feel better?" And then he got this mean look on his face, and he said, "I'll tear it up, and then I'll just see you at your court-martial. How about that?" Now my head's spinning because, he's using the word court-martial. I've not been charged with a crime. I've not even been accused of a crime. My thoughts racing. I didn't really have an out. My undergrad degree is in psychology, and I recalled that you couldn't really be hypnotized if you didn't want to. Now the drug, I knew I'd have no defense against that. So we agreed that I'm going to do the hypnosis and I'm going to do the drug. And about that time, there was a knock at the door. This major walked in, wearing oak leaves, but with no name tag. He didn't carry himself like a military officer. He carried himself like a therapist or a priest. He walked in and he had a little, like a shaving kit under his arm, and he sets it on the table. And he gives me this great big smile and holds out his hand and said, "Sergeant Lovelace, it's so nice to finally meet you." I said, "How do you do, sir?" He says, "Oh, please, call me Brad. That is my name." And he says, "Is it okay if I call you Terry? That is your name." But I'm like, "Sure, yes, sir." And I'm, no. Don't you mean yes, Brad? And he sits down and he says, "I understand you're from St. Louis." And I said, "Yes, I am." And he starts rattling off some landmarks, some Italian restaurants. We're talking, and I realize that I'm getting comfortable with this guy. And that sends a shiver up my spine. I mean, I got alarm bells going off in my head. So he said, still in an upbeat mood, he said, "It'll make you feel like you had a couple beers." And he winks at me and says, "I bet you enjoy a few beers on the weekend." Opening the shaving kit, and he's kind of humming to himself, and he lays out a little towel, and there was a syringe, tourniquet, piece of rubber tubing, some alcohol swabs, and some Band-Aids. Yeah, people tell me that it's kind of pleasant, and you can do that. You can sit back and just enjoy the feeling. I'm really scared at this point. I know this guy is not my friend, but I made the decision that I'm not going to give him my entire mind. So I'm doing multiplication tables, going through Beatle lyrics, Rolling Stones, and he says, and I just want you to relax, relax, relax. You're standing at the top of a stairwell, you're looking down, and we're going to go down and turn on a light and see what we see. Relax, relax, and take that first step. Can you see that in your mind's eye, Terry? Take that first step down, now feeling twice as relaxed. In my mind's eye, I'm going up the stairs, tensing my muscles as opposed to relaxing them. I do remember he gave me the drug. There was just a little pinch in the arm. He said, Terry, I want you to go back. You were on a camping trip, you and Toby, right? And I said, that's right, Brad. He said, my, that must have been exciting. I said, yes, it was, Brad. And he said, and you saw some funny lights in the sky, didn't you, Terry? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, but they weren't funny lights at all, were they, Terry? And I said, no, they weren't. And he said, who were they, Terry? And I said, they were the space people. And I thought to myself, where did that come from? He asked me questions about, what did you see? These lights came down, what did you see? And I told him. I made the statement that aboard the ship, I saw what looked like other human beings. And I said, I think they were members of the military, and they wore tan-colored flight suits with an orange patch on their shoulder. They wore standard issue combat boots, same thing I wear. And they carried themselves like they were crew members. They weren't frozen in place like Toby and I were. That seemed to create a stir. I heard a lot of shuffling of papers and an expletive. Brad jumps in and says, now, Terry, we know you never saw human beings. You never saw anything because there was no spaceship. It's all just a bad dream. And you have some ugly memories. And he said, and I'm going to take those memories away from you. Before we do that, I have to ask you, when you spoke to these agents, did you tell them the truth about not taking any photographs? So I easily said, yes, Brad, I never took a single picture. There was some discussion between these guys I couldn't hear, discussion in whispers. And that's when he brought me back up the stairwell. It was countdown like 3, 2, 1, clapped his hands, wake up, Terry, feeling refreshed, feeling better than you felt in a very long time. And then Brad just walked out the door. The major was all smiles. He said, well, I think we can close your file, Sergeant Lovelace. And he says, finish your enlistment, get out, go to school, do whatever you want to do. And he said, and have a nice life. Don't trespass onto federal property anymore. My thought was they wanted to make sure that I didn't have a 36 exposure roll of black and white photographs of this UFO. That was the whole object of the exercise. Secondly, they knew they weren't funny lights in the sky, were they, Terry? Who were they? In 1987, my wife and I were at mall.
On the first day of
in Lansing, Michigan. It was Christmas time. We were shopping and we had split up. And I turned the corner, walked down another aisle, and to my right was what I assumed would be a women's dress shop or a clothing store. There was like a banquet table, and it had these naked mannequins. They were naked from the waist up. And they had long, slender arms, and they were posed in all kinds of weird positions because I guess they hadn't dressed them yet. Toby and I could perceive that Toby was next to me, to my left, and I opened my eyes, and I can't move my head. I can't move any of my muscles. I'm holding my clothing. I'm nude otherwise. I can roll my eyes around and look, but I can't turn my head. I can't move a muscle other than my eyes. This thing that I was in, it was a huge space. It was bigger on the inside than it was from the outside. If the outside looked like a medical building, this thing looked like an NFL stadium. Everything was gray, stainless steel, or white. The floor seemed to be like a gray rubberized affair. There were support structures like beams to my right and to my left, and walkways that went up, but I don't know how far because I couldn't roll my eyes up that far. There were the little gray guys running all over the place. They're task-oriented. They're all doing business. I mean, nobody's, taking a smoke break. They're all doing something. I assumed that these aren't, sentient things in the way you and I are. These are like little robots. They're about a little over 3 foot high. Their heads, their arms are disproportionate to their torso. And there were a group of people off to our right, and we were segregated from them by some space. But what's concerning was they weren't all male, they weren't military people, they were just average, like men, women, and children. And then I heard a woman screaming, and then I heard Toby say, "No, no, no." And then they came and they got me. They grabbed me by the elbows and they walked me. I felt like I was on a cushion of air or something, but I was completely mobile. And they took me down this long hallway, and there was a standard porcelain exam table. There were 2 insectoid-like things that were like 8 foot tall. This had a real clinical, medical vibe to it. I didn't think I was there to be tortured. I thought I was there for some kind of medical reason. There were 2 of these things, and then there were the little gray guys around them. And they did something to my lower back, and it hurt like hell. And I can't open my jaw all the way to yell. So I'm trying to articulate, "This hurts, don't do this." I'm screaming. I'm forcing air out of my lungs. And when I was screaming, or trying to scream, it appeared like I annoyed one of these bug things. It had a triangular shaped head with big multifaceted eyes, and it turned with a left eye and looked down at me. And I heard in my head, "Why are you screaming? Stop screaming. You know we don't hurt you. You know we take you back. Now stop screaming." Tapped me in the middle of the forehead, and I was out. The next thing I knew, Toby and I were kind of semi-conscious, 20 feet from my car, but we were laying in weeds, and 4 of them were there and picked us up and threw us in the tent. So I had a routine knee x-ray. from the VA hospital. I get all my medical care from the VA for what that's worth. And then
Speak to me, speak to me, speak to me. Weapons of hate, weapons of hate, weapons of hate. We don't need any Speak to me in the language of love. Don't screw it up at all with weapons of hate, just weapons of hate. You wait and taste the pain. We don't need any ghosts to tell us the most things we're lies in disguise. Now repent in the language of love. The only language is love. Now repent in the language of love. The only language is love. We don't need any ghosts to tell us the most things we're lies in disguise. Now repent in the language of love. The only language is love. Now repent in the language of love. The only language is love.
A big thank you to Kido Jempir for the feature track Language of Love from the newly released album Green Monster. Thanks also to Brady Madison for the track Beams of Light Pool Past My Eyes, and Southman and Mon Plaisir for the track Passé Composé, Present Improvise. Visit tuiarts.com/music for more info on the artists. If you would like to learn more about our featured guest, Terry Lovelace, or purchase his book, Incident at Devil's Den, visit terrylovelace.com. You can also purchase his book at Amazon. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks for listening, folks. Stay true in the meantime, and I'll catch you on the next episode.